So here's a sample case where I look at my own profile versus a traditional Chinese state-owned enterprise. So I take my big 5 dimensions, starting with time, and I decide that, and with the question being, how strict are you with deadlines and timetables? I would say pretty high, and I am punctual. When it comes to conflict, how amicable or low conflict is my organization? I have to say I put it in the middle, and it may actually be lower. I feel that being direct is beneficial, especially if the news isn't good. Now, I'm a New Yorker, and I feel that the fact that I have learned polite ways to ask direct questions and that I am patient about getting answers to my questions, I feel that makes me a medium in terms of conflict avoidance. But someone from China or Japan or Southeast Asia may still think that I am a little bit lower on the scale than that I have pretty low conflict avoidance skills. On safety, I put myself in the middle. I am willing to accept a certain amount of risk, but I have formal financial analysis training, and I always make sure that my risks are grounded in reality. So I put myself right in the middle there on safety. Internal power, again, I'm in the middle, or I might actually be a little high. I like my team to be honest and upfront. I think that honest exchanges yield the right answer. I don't like people to stand on ceremony too much, but on the other hand, I like being the boss, and I like people to know I'm the boss. So I put myself right in the middle there, but actually that might be getting edged up a little bit, if I was to be honest here. And finally, external power. Now, I spend most of my time as a foreigner working overseas with some pretty sketchy legal protections. So I am very big on compliance. I am not willing to risk breaking laws or violating regulations if at all possible. Okay, so that is my profile, which might be getting modified, but it's good enough for what we're working with. Now I'm going to make some best guesses about the counterparty. So I'm the one in red, and let's look at our counterparty, who is in black. And remember, he is from a state-owned enterprise in China. As far as his respect for deadlines, I'm marking that pretty low. The reality is he does have a high respect for deadlines, just not mine. He has respect for a different set of deadlines. And if those take precedent over mine, then that's the way it's going to work. When it comes to amiability or low conflict, they're going to be much higher than I am on this. Face is going to be really important to them. Ceremony is going to be very important to them. And their conflict avoidance, their attention to detail and to ritual and to ceremony goes way up if we reach a point where the party gets involved. If things go well in your negotiation with the state-owned enterprise, you are going to eventually be meeting people from the party. And at that point, the Chinese side gets super interested in preserving face and in avoiding embarrassment. And the next one is safety or risk aversion. I put myself in the middle. I'm willing to take calculated risks. The Chinese can be on either pole. The Chinese have a weird habit of being either super risk averse or have a high appetite for risk. The reason I put the Chinese as highly risk averse is if you're negotiating with the Chinese counterpart, if he doesn't understand the next step, whether it's internal or external, he's going to shut down that negotiation and wait for more information. So this is the one that's going to affect you, and you need to be aware of that. As far as internal power roles, the Chinese side is going to be very big on this. They have their own internal hierarchy and ritual, and even if it's not clear to you, it's very clear to them. External power, the way you see them, they are not going to care much about external power. They're going to seem to not care about the regulations or about local law enforcement in many cases. If you're working with a state-owned enterprise, in many cases, they will see themselves as an extension of the government and as the agent of party policy. So they think they're with the government. They think they're with the party. So they're going to seem to have very low regard for the kinds of rules that you care about. Okay, that's it for now. In the next section, we'll look at how we do the gap analysis and the variance analysis and come up with an action plan for bridging these gaps. Okay, so we've done the profile of ourselves, we've done the profile of our Chinese state-owned enterprise counterpart, and there you can see them superimposed. So I can tell at a glance we're going to have issues with time. We're going to have some kind of issues with conflict avoidance if I'm not careful. An external power could be an issue if I don't find a way of dealing with it early. And the final step is to analyze the gaps between our negotiating cultures and our negotiating agendas and figure out how we're going to plan to build the bridge that's going to close that gap. So the first dimension was time. I'm pretty punctual. I'm skeptical about their punctuality. I think that they may not stick to deadlines and timetables even if they agree to them. So my first pass adjustment is to make sure my timetable has slack in it. I'm going to consider incentives for faster performance from them. But spoiler alert, I'm coming back to that, and we're going to dig into that one in more detail. And the next one is conflict avoidance. And I know that they care about this more than I do, so this should be a pretty easy one and a pretty cheap one to make the appropriate adjustment on. So part of my analysis is they are likely to have a pre-arranged agenda. These guys want to avoid embarrassing the boss, and that means that they're going to want to do a lot of back-channel negotiating and have most of the big things arranged before they ever meet face-to-face. So my adjustment here is to be careful not to appear aggressive and to give them a lot of room to propose their agenda and propose their variables, even though it might take longer than it would take you or me. And I'm also going to brief the other team members not to blurt out their ideas. We want to be passing notes and whispering urgently to our neighbor as opposed to shouting down our Chinese counterparts. When it comes to safety, I'm not that far from them on their appetite for risk. That's not going to be the problem. The problem is how they're going to demonstrate their risk avoidance, and that is to freeze progress. If there's something they don't know, they're just going to clam up and shut down, and they're going to wait for more information. And that's true even if it has nothing to do with you. Even if it's a total internal issue, they will never tell you that. They'll just shut things down. And the adjustment is to not push them. Now have alternatives prepared. So if you just say, plan A, yes or no, they may freeze up. But if you say plan A or plan B, which one is the right idea, that will get them talking. So having alternatives prepared is going to help address their safety concerns in some cases. A big source of difference is going to be the internal power structures. Especially on their end. As far as you're concerned, you're completely transparent, but they may try to obscure their true decision makers. And a very common Chinese technique is to, midway through negotiation, get rid of the previous decision maker, put in someone new who agrees to all of your concessions but disagrees with all of his concessions, his team's concessions, and you have to start all over again. And finally, external power. They are likely to value their connections and their network very, very highly, to the point where it might be the main value they're bringing, and they may decide it's worth an exorbitant amount. And that's something that is going to be very difficult for you to live with if you go ahead. So set objective benchmarks for performance. As a general rule, you don't pay for guanxi, you don't pay for connections, you pay with partnership equity for their ability to hit benchmarks and get things done.